Good afternoon. My name is Mark Krikorian. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies, a think tank that examines all the various wrinkles and shadows of the immigration issue.
Congress can exclude any foreigner who wants to come here for any reason it wants. I mean, foreigners have no right to come to the United States, and we can use whatever criteria we want. Now, we might use stupid criteria, but that's on us. It's not a constitutional issue.
And in fact, just this week, we found more evidence of that. The French sent our intelligence agencies the fingerprints of the attackers in Paris, and there was no trace of them anywhere in our databases, the very databases that we're supposed to be using to screen the Syrian refugees.
You know, before we came, I actually had kind of researched whether there were going to be large-scale crowd events here in Nice is the kind of thing that would attract terrorists. And the European soccer finals had just finished. Several of the matches were here, but that was weeks before we got here, and I figured, well, that's okay. You know, I completely overlooked the idea that Bastille Day, of course, is a huge event everywhere in France. It's their big 4th of July. And so yeah, I mean, I was actually not all that surprised once I found out what happened. They were just like in the 4th of July. Everything was normal, lots of people, kids on their shoulders. And then when it ended, I turned around. A lot of people did and started leaving, but there was musical performances continuing, so a lot of people stayed. And as soon as I got back to my apartment, which was just a couple blocks away, right outside our window, which overlooks a pedestrian mall with cafes and stores and things, we started to hear screaming. I mean, hysterical screaming, running, people knocking tables over, glass shattering. And we looked out. People were obviously running for their lives. I assumed it was some kind of shooter or some kind of attack. I mean, that's the obvious thing. And, my kids were gawking out the window. I told them to get away from the window because didn't have any idea what was going on. Where I was, when the fireworks were over, people who weren't there to listen to the concert, which was going to continue, just started streaming back into wherever they were going, and I did likewise. And so, I don't know, maybe not even 10 minutes after the fireworks were over, maybe 5, I'm not sure, is when I heard the screaming and the crowds of people running away under our window. Well, I didn't see the attack. I saw the people running away from it. Our apartment is about, half a mile or so away from where the attack was, on overlooking a pedestrian mall. And I was actually at the fireworks, but came back. And as soon as I got back in the apartment, we looked out our balcony, and people were screaming and running and knocking over tables and all of that, clearly running away from something. And wasn't clear what, but I mean, I'm down now at the beach where it happened. I mean, behind the police line, and it's blinking lights everywhere, and ambulances were still arriving. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes ago, I saw another ambulance come still. So it's obviously an enormous deal. Well, I mean, there's a fair number of people on the streets. Still, this is an ambulance driving away from the site. That sound. I mean, it's not huge numbers of people, but yeah, there are people still sort of right outside their hotels, and on that promenade along the beach. Not that many still, but there's still some. And then once things settled down right outside my window, I, much to my chagrin, went out to see how close I could get and see what was going on. And the police had a police line set up, so I couldn't get right to where the actual carnage was. But you could see not just all of the police presence and everything, but a constant flow. Even 2 hours later, there were still ambulances arriving, presumably from farther away. And then the most grim thing I saw was a whole convoy of minivans from the Nice City Coroner's Office arriving to do their work. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I was obviously, when the screaming and the crowds running happened, I was surprised. But even before we came here, I was figuring, look, we're going to be here during Bastille Day, and if I were a bad guy, that's the day I would pick to do something. So in that sense, if that's what it turns out to be, no, it's not surprising. Well, I mean, we have 2 weeks left on this apartment, and at this point, Nice is the safest place in all of France. I mean, they've got soldiers and police every place. So I'm not going anywhere.
Whereas the conflict we're in now is against a non-state group, or many of them, Al-Qaeda as well as ISIS and others, that are kind of all over the place, don't really belong to any particular country. So it's similar, but it's not exactly the same thing.
And secondly, whatever money we take from our people through taxes to devote to these purposes should yield the maximum humanitarian effect. And unfortunately, resettlement of refugees in the United States from Syria or from Yemen or Somalia or other failed states fails on both of those counts.
The book, as you may have heard, sold out with a long subhead that has become quite de rigueur in policy books.